The focus on the ecosystem intelligence is something that we've been doing here for us 2-3 years now, and the report that Allan just talked about, and there's a series of reports in that portfolio. But kind of the voice of the partner is kind of almost a culmination of what it all means, because we, as you pointed out, we'll be looking at the vendors, so continue to look at the vendors, how they perform, how we can benchmark them against each other. But that partner ecosystem lens is ever so important. So the voice of the partner is kind of the continuation of that portfolio, the expansion of that portfolio.
Welcome to TBR Talks, decoding strategies and ecosystems of the globe's top tech firms, where we talk business model disruption in the broad technology ecosystem, from management consultancies to systems integrators, hyperscalers to independent software vendors, telecom operators to network and infrastructure vendors, and chip manufacturers to value-added resellers. We'll be answering some of the key intelligence questions we've heard from executives and business unit leaders among the leading professional services, IT, and telecom vendors. I'm Patrick Heffernan, Principal Analyst, and today we'll be talking about ecosystems broadly with Hristov, Principal Analyst for TBR's Digital Transformation Practice, and Allan Krans, Principal Analyst for TBR's Cloud and Software Practice. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast. Both of you coming back again. I appreciate that. Our tagline is that we're TBR Talks, decoding strategies and ecosystems for the globe's top tech firms. As a firm, TBR has been decoding strategies for 2 decades plus, but ecosystems is something we've really dug into a lot more just in the last couple of years. I think it came from both the demand from our clients and our own recognition of how much value we could bring by combining the practices in different ways, looking at the competitive market in different ways, looking at the vendor sets in different ways. So we've had a lot of research over the last couple of years. I want to focus on 2 today. One of them is what's coming up, the second edition of our Fed Cloud Ecosystem Report. And Allan, you can explain exactly what I mean by that. And then Boz, upcoming is our Voice of the Partner research. We've done Voice of the Customer for years now. We're going to Voice of the Partner. Both of these are very much about what's happening in the broad technology ecosystem, not just the practices that the 3 of us cover, but the entirety really of TBR. So let's start there with Fed Cloud. So what is the report, or what was the first edition all about? What are you expecting to see in the second edition?
Sure. Yeah. So for the US Fed Cloud Ecosystem Report, it takes the ecosystem concept that we have in multiple different iterations throughout the portfolio, where we look at a group of the largest SIs that are going to market and delivering services and implementations for their customers, and the technology vendors that are, supplying the intelligence, the IT part of that equation. But this is a little bit different because it focuses on a single customer, which happens to be, if not the largest, one of the largest buyers of IT in the world, the US federal government. And so it changes the landscape a bit as well. So it's not just focused on a single customer. It's a different set of SIs that are set up and basically exclusively work with, for a large part, the US federal government for all of the projects that they have going on across their agencies. So that's kind of the lens that we're looking at with that report. And so we did one iteration of that, looked at the big hyperscale platforms with Microsoft, Google, Oracle, AWS. For this upcoming iteration, we do have some changes, not only in terms of the vendor coverage. We're going to add ServiceNow, which has recently reported that they have more than 1.5 billion in total public sector ACV. A lot of that is coming from the federal government in the US. So that's the logic for kind of adding them in as a fairly significant player already with that customer. And they're doing a lot in AI, right, which I think is, so from a topical perspective, fits pretty well. They've seen a lot of demand and uptake for their Pro Plus SKUs, despite I think it's 60% price uplift over the already premium tier that this goes on top of.
Wow.
So it's not cheap, but customers are investing, starting to see, really test out what the value is for that significant pricing uplift. And so we'll be adding them alongside the other vendors for the upcoming update.
Yeah, and so I know we've done, so Boz has actually led some research that combined the AWS, Microsoft, and Google Cloud Platform with the top SIs broadly, not just focused on the US government. And you guys introduced Oracle into that mix, and we're talking about just the Fed, ServiceNow as well. So it's sort of perfectly expanding that matrix that we're looking at.
And there's probably discounts
I'm sure
at some level.
No.
However, it's still, it's
No doubt.
not free.
For a buyer that size, no doubt. Yeah. So then, Boz, let's talk about voice of the partner. So this comes out of the voice of the customer research and maybe trying to better understand what the partners themselves say about each other. So can you sort of walk through what the report's going to look like, but then also what are some of the key insights you're hoping to get out of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you brought up in the beginning, I mean, the focus on the ecosystem intelligence is something that we've been doing here for us 2-3 years now. And the report that Allan just talked about, and there's a series of reports in that portfolio. But kind of the voice of the partner is kind of almost a culmination of what it all means. Because we, as you pointed out, we've been looking at the vendors, so continue to look at the vendors, how they perform, how we can benchmark them against each other. But that partner ecosystem lens is ever so important. So the voice of the partner is kind of the continuation of that portfolio, the expansion of that portfolio, and thinking about how we go to the end customers and asking the questions about their desires and needs when it comes to working with particular vendors, and what are some of the barriers and challenges, for expanding the digital transformation programs. Now, the voice of the partner takes some of that thinking and translates it through the lens of what does it mean when partners work with each other? Do they tell each other everything that they want to say to each other if they're in the same room, or they have something else that they may be missing? They don't say to each other. So we're taking a survey approach, similar to what we do for the voice of the customer. We have designed a survey where we're going to be, we're starting with US only focused executives that we're going to be surveying, that we're splitting across 3 groups of vendors. OEM providers, the one that comes to mind, like Dell and HP and Pure Storage and NetApp are some of the examples there. We have a second group of vendors, which is cloud providers, which we split between the hyperscalers, like the infrastructure as a service providers, like the Azure and AWS and Google and Alibaba and Oracle Cloud. And then within the second group of cloud providers, we have SaaS and PaaS providers, include some of the traditional ISVs like SAP and Oracle, but also some of the cloud providers like Workday and Salesforce, but also some of the PaaS vendors like Snowflake and Databricks and the likes. And then the last group, I should say, is the professional services. So if you take those 3 groups of vendors, we are targeting executives that are responsible or oversee alliance partner relationships with the other 2 groups, essentially, like alliance managers and above, obviously all the way to CIO and anybody who actually has any influence and oversees those relationships, day-to-day operations, operating model, go-to-market model, commercial model. So people that can actually comment on expectations, performance, and opportunities when they have the relationship with the other group of vendors. So it's almost like a matrix view that we are going after. We're asking professional services partners essentially about the sentiment around working with the cloud providers and OEM, and the same thing the other way around. So it's a multidimensional view, matrix view, as I mentioned, that we're hoping to get a better insights of, again, what's missing. That's the big question we're trying to answer, because we often hear about the big splashy marketing announcements between the 2 providers, forging the next initiative, co-investing, co-developing. But that's all great. But then, the result is like, how do we measure that announcement? What does that mean? And how well do those vendors actually follow on those strategic programs? And it's an insight that help us to evaluate against those announcements, and also provide some insights of recommendations and how maybe there's a newcomer into the market, maybe a niche provider that wants to better understand how to better work with those groups of vendors. Right. That could provide a good insight of someone who maybe is new to the market or trying to build a credibility and trust within the ecosystem. So it's another way to think about it. And also it's a good triangulation point when we talk to enterprise buyers as well, because vendors tell us their story, buyers tell their story to us, and our job as analysts is to kind of vet against each other and trying to understand what does it all mean to the market, to the vendors, whether they all intersect, whereas there's a gap and an opportunity. So I think it's a start. It's as I said, it's a combination of the ecosystem intelligence reports coverage that we've been doing for the last couple of years. There'll be more of that portfolio that we're adding as reports. But the voice of the partners, it's a survey-based report. We start with. We're going to augment the survey with a handful of IDIs, in-depth interviews that we are going to actually conduct ourselves. That will help us to further support and find some more additional insights beyond the survey. That's obviously going to give us some data. and those key intelligence questions, but having the in-depth interviews so that we're going to conduct as well, and having those quotes to further strengthen those analysis and get some more insights.
Right. And so I know you got feedback from across the firm, from across TBR, on the kinds of questions and what we wanted to put in there. So, Allan, I'm curious, when you think about the vendors that are in your practice in cloud and software that Boz mentioned, are there certain things that you anticipate you're going to know, certain things you'll know better about them, some insights you think you'll gain out of this research?
Yeah, I mean, I think now more than ever, with everything around AI and Gen AI, it's not necessarily about the specific technology or the delivery method. It's about the outcome, the benefit, and whatever it takes to pull that together, whether it's a service, whether it's a product, whether it's a cloud service. All that is on the table, I think, now more than ever. And so for that side of it, it's how to best align with that. And we've seen a lot of kind of breaking out of silos across the board, but just with the vendors that we cover, that doesn't need to be all public cloud. There's different packages and delivery methods to meet all those nuanced needs that exist in the market. So understanding more, what direction customers and their SI partners are going, and how they arrive at those decisions, and how everybody kind of gets lined up behind that.
Do you think there's a possibility that how we think about some of the alliances that we know and love that have been well established, do you think there's a possibility where it'll change our minds a little bit, that we'll start to see them a little differently?
I hope so.
Okay.
I hope so. I mean, change is good, right?
Change is good. Yeah.
It's. I mean, I hope so, not in a negative way. I mean, in terms of like, it's new insights is good for to have the help the discussion.
Right.
It's hearing what we already know. It's kind of like it's a good confirmation, but I think it's identifying new opportunities, especially around the sentiment between the different groups. It's important. We have some hypotheses that we have put in place in terms of going after the research and thinking about like the multi-party, for example, is one way to think about, like going for 3 and 4 way partnerships, the exclusivity around different groups, the joint investments, what it all means. So we're just trying to identify and see how actually the executives that are actually the day-to-day operations are facing those challenges, how they think about when they work with the other groups of vendors and what it all means. I mean, to Allan's point, Gen AI is changing everyone's, kind of a behavior these days, right? But then it's still so much more foundational work that has to happen, different workloads in different environments, and everyone has their, sales quota they have to meet, and they have to continue to run the business. So how do you continue to run the business while you invest for innovation along with your partners, and how much are your partners aligned with your vision and strategic objectives is very important right now, especially in today's environment where macro, is being a little bit more challenging, and spending has been as fast and as increasing as it has been in the last 3-4 years prior to that. So hoping that there's some kind of a confirmation, but also new insights. That's what I meant by it.
And so on that point of spending, I think, Allan, to come back to you for a second, the government IT spending and cloud spending hasn't slowed down. So we published the first edition of this last year around July 4th. Are there certain things you're going to be looking for to see what's changed? Or do you know if some is AWS, Microsoft, and Google Cloud, Oracle even, can you think of anything that's happened in the last year in terms of their activity in the government space that's going to be highlighted in the report?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of underdogs getting stronger that we expect to see in the second iteration. So Microsoft had a huge presence in the first version. They won the JEDI contract, and that was recreated, but still have a very strong relationship in a number of different solution areas that drive their revenue in the space. But vendors like AWS, through expanded alliances with CACI, SAIC, and Leidos, a couple of the big players, they've enhanced those since we last published. So we'll be looking to understand what forms those are taking, what agencies. But clearly, we expect more growth from them within the U.S. Fed space. And then also Google, which was really nascent. They've had a number of different organizational and cultural things that limited their presence in the first version of the report. But they, one specific deal with Mantech for $18 billion with the DoD, all of a sudden that kind of changes things and potentially opens up more opportunity leveraging, because we do see there's alliances between hyperscalers and these Fed SIs that they kind of develop these working teams, typically do a lot of their business together. And so winning a deal like that with Mantech could be something that ripples through additional opportunities within the agencies.
Right. And I think that's one thing that we'll see by the end of all of this, like next fall when we get back together, is just how much the alliances and the way that the cloud and software vendors work together with the Fed players, how that gets either replicated or what can't get replicated in the commercial sector space. So, and I like your comment about Google. I know exactly what you mean by cultural challenges they may have had working with the U.S. government.
Yeah.
Excellent. So we will come back to this. Both reports are publishing in June, I believe. And so we'll come back in September in season 2 of TBR Talks, and we will revisit this and see. I'm really going to be mostly interested in, no offense, but how did people react to the research? What kind of questions did you get from our clients? Not what did you think about it, but what questions did you get from our clients over the course of the summer? So excellent. Thank you, gentlemen. Next week in our season 1 finale, I'll be speaking about all things analyst relations and professional services with Rob Donnelly, global leader of PwC's analyst relations team. So don't forget to send us your key intelligence questions on business strategy, ecosystems, and management through the form in the show notes below, and visit tbri.com to learn how we help tech companies, large and small, answer these questions with the research, data, and analysis that my guests, like Allan and Boaz, bring to this conversation every week. Once again, I'm your host, Patrick Heffernan, Principal Analyst at TBR. Thanks for joining us. See you next week.